Hey freaks, it's JJ. Welcome to my channel. If you're new here, I talk about rock and metal music, and I discuss the stories behind some of my favorite concept albums. Today we are diving back into the Ayreon Universe, and we are talking about Ayreon's 2000 album, Universal Migrator Part 1, The Dream Sequencer. So this is part 1 of a two-part album, and I will be covering part 2 a little bit later, so stay tuned for that. I heard that Ayreon's thought process behind splitting this album into two different albums was basically like this first half, the Dream Sequencer, is supposed to be for his prog rock fans, while the second half, Flight of the Migrator, is supposed to be more for his metal fans. So I tend to enjoy part 2 a little bit more than part 1, but that's not to say that part 1 doesn't have its merits as well, you know. I do enjoy this first half of this two-part album. It's a little calmer, more relaxing than part 2, and so it definitely has it also has a really cool concept that I like to discuss as well. So one thing that I really like about this album, and just about like the whole Ayreon project in general, is how genius Ayreon was in like creating this universe. It's very much like the Cosmere by Brandon Sanderson. If you're not familiar with Brandon Sanderson, I would maybe compare it to like the Marvel Universe, where it's like you don't have to understand and listen to the other albums and know those stories in order to like and appreciate the story for this album, but for those who are following along, it just makes it a lot cooler, you know, that to see how everything intersects and how everything like ties in with the other albums. If you have not watched my two other videos about the Ayreon Universe, starting with the Final Experiment and Into the Electric Castle, I'll link those up here somewhere and also at the end of this video if you want to watch those. And get caught up on everything in the universe that I've covered so far. Anyway, coincidentally, the last video I did on this channel was talking about Between the Buried and Me and their album Coma Ecliptic, which bears a striking resemblance to the premise of this album. And I swear I didn't do that on purpose, it's just kind of, that's just how it ended up turning out. But yeah, so if you're also a fan of Between the Buried and Me, you can kind of draw some parallels between the two concepts. Anyway, let's get started. So this album takes place after the events of the Final Experiment, and it follows our protagonist, who's referred to as the colonist. The colonist, whose parents escaped the destruction of Earth to colonize Mars, has grown up his entire life on Mars. But pretty much all the resources of Mars have been depleted, and the colonist is the last surviving human, not only on Mars, but also, like, in the world, because the Earth has also been destroyed as well. So he's, like, the last human in the universe, like, in the solar system right now. So he's in a little bit of a bad spot, I'd say. So this album goes backwards in time. Each track will take us farther and farther into the past. And so we start off with track 1, The Dream Sequencer, and this is current day for the colonist. And so the Dream Sequencer is this machine that was invented by the colonists of Mars, as their only form of like entertainment and escapism. So the Dream Sequencer is this really powerful machine that can take you pretty much anywhere, from like memories of your childhood all the way through like previous like reincarnations that you've had in past lives. It can travel you all the way throughout human history. So our colonist knows that he's going to die soon. Because, you know, he's going to run out of oxygen. And so, you know, as part of his final days, he decides to enter the Dream Sequencer to kind of, you know, not make his last days quite so sad and lonely. Track 2, My House on Mars. So this track takes place a few decades ago, because the first world that the colonist arrives in is from his childhood, and he is a boy growing up on Mars, and the track is basically him lamenting his father's death. His father had always promised him that he would take him to Earth one day, but you know, during this war that destroyed Earth, his father was called away to fight the battles of this war, and obviously never returned. So this is the colonist as a young child, just realizing that he's never going to see Earth. And so I think this is especially important in understanding the character and his motivations. So like when he goes to Earth in the upcoming tracks, it's his first time visiting Earth. So experiencing these different sequences of human history is like everything's new for him. He's never been to Earth before, and so it makes everything he sees, he's seeing it with fresh eyes, and he has a really interesting perspective, because he's never quite experienced anything like Earth before, and so he kind of sees it, he kind of gets to experience it sort of like how I think like an alien would experience it. Like, why are these people killing each other? It doesn't make any sense, you know, because the human condition is complex, and he's kind of discovering that for the very first time. Track 3, 2084. So this track obviously takes place in the year 2084. The colonist is pre-incarnated into this woman who is fleeing Earth in the year 2084. And so the final experiment has failed, and the war foretold by Ayreon, the blind minstrel from the final experiment, has come true. And so my interpretation of this track may differ from what the lyrics explicitly say, but this is just how I imagine it. I imagine that this woman flees to Mars and arrives just in time to give birth to her child, but that the same moment that she is successfully giving birth to her child, the Earth is destroyed. And so it's like this crazy moment of her like dying on the kitchen floor after childbirth, having these feelings of like hope, which is completely juxtaposed by like the total despair of her home planet being destroyed. So that takes us to track number 4, One Small Step. So our colonist is pre-incarnated into a boy in 1969. And his father wakes him up in the middle of the night. He's like, hey, you got to see this. There's, you know, news happening with the Apollo mission. And so, of course, the boy gets to watch Neil Armstrong take his first steps on the moon. And so the boy, I think, is maybe has some sort of like subconscious perception, you know, unknowingly getting the sense that this crazy, impressive, and amazing event, you know, someone walking on the moon for the first time, is not quite as fortuitous as it might seem on the surface, and I think he kind of gets the sense that it has some ominous implications as well, which I think is, you know, the essence of this track is kind of just to foreshadow the underlying theme that a lot of Ayreon albums talk about, which is the question, like, at what point does technology and ingenuity go from being like awesome and helpful to being harmful and destructive? So that idea is kind of introduced here, I believe, and then further explored in some of the other tracks. Track number 5, The Shooting Company of Captain Francis B. Koch. I don't know. Someone help me pronounce that down in the comments, please. I don't know how to say it. Here in this track, our colonist is pre-incarnated into a man living in 1642, and he is posing for a painting called The Night Watch by Rembrandt, which is obviously a famous Dutch painter. Again, I feel like this song is foreshadowing like another theme that the Ayreon Universe touches on quite often, is like how humans use the glorification of battle to justify like the moral depravity of war. You know, like this concept I think is a little bit better explained maybe in the following track, but anyway, that brings us to track 6, Dragon of the Sea. So our colonist is then pre-incarnated into Queen Elizabeth I. So the year is 1587, and Queen Elizabeth has just ordered Sir Francis Drake to lead the naval battle to defeat the invading Spanish Armada. And so Sir Drake was known to the English, of course, as a hero, but to the Spanish he was known as this like awful pirate who they called El Drac, which means the dragon. And so, you know, Sir Drake attacked, you know, the Spanish ships and eventually resulted in the defeat of the Spanish Armada. So again, kind of like talking about the glorification of battle and what that has to do with the human psychology over the course of history. Track 7, Temple of the Cat. So this track takes place sometime during the 8th century. So our colonist is then pre-incarnated into this little Mayan girl in Tikal, where she's on her way to worship the Jaguar King in the Temple of the Cat. And so the Jaguar god is the god of the night sun. And the night sun is basically just the sun, but it's the form that it takes when it travels through the night world after it sets every day. And so, you know, the Jaguar god is also known as like the ruler of Xibalba, which is Xibalba is the underworld, and so he also battles jaguars in the underworld as well, which I think is really cool. Anyway, I just had a lot of fun researching this specific track because I love like ancient civilizations and ancient histories and things like that. Anyway, sorry, that was a tangent. Anyway, this track I think introduces another concept of the human condition, which is how much religion plays a part in like history, and how, if you're looking into the future, and we already see how the future ends up with, the destruction of Earth and, the last human being alive, I think it kind of shows that religion does obviously have some role in the fate of the planet. Track 8, Carried by the Wind. Here we learn that one of the past lives that the colonists have lived was that of Ayreon, who was, of course, the blind minstrel from the final experiment. And he, Ayreon's whole goal was to, warn of the coming apocalypse. And, his death has kind of changed him into this, like, ghost-like being who's, kind of warning, just echoes through the darkness of the universe. And, I just imagine him as this, like, cosmic ghost that just wanders the universe, looking for hope for humanity and, for any kind of living soul that he can share his warning with. But then he arrives on Mars and he sees that it's totally empty, and he just kind of mourns the loss of humanity and the total human extinction that he sees there. Track number 9, and the Druids turn to stone. So we go back all the way to 2800 BC. The colonist witnesses this sacred ritual by a group of Druids in what will eventually become Wiltshire, England. So the Druids become kind of immortalized as centuries to witness the changing of the world. And once the ceremony is complete, the Druids then turn stone, and they become what we know today as the Stonehenge. So I thought this was really cool. One of my favorite things that fiction does is come up with ideas to explain phenomenon that we don't understand. And so I love it whenever people are I don't know, they use some kind of mystery and then they explain it with the Bermuda Triangle was caused by aliens. But I don't know, this is one of my favorite tropes when it comes to, I don't know, just storytelling in general, is fictionalizing some kind of crazy scenario that explains something that we just don't have an answer for scientifically. Anyway, this track I think just kind of the point of this track, I think, is to show how much religion has played a part in the shaping of the planet, and, of course, its eventual demise. Track number 10, The First Man on Earth. So then we go all the way back to the year 50,000 BC, and the colonist is pre-incarnated into a world where there are no humans. He ends up becoming the first Homo sapien to graduate from being an ape-like being into, the evolution of man. And so here he's the first man on Earth, and I think this is where all the themes from the earlier tracks kind of come together. The colonist, finds so much beauty and peace and solace in this perfect Earth that's completely untouched by human technology, war, or religion. And so I think this sort of epiphany of the humans have caused the destruction of the Earth. Humanity was so much better when it was no one here. And obviously the Earth was plentiful and beautiful before we all ruined it. But I think it's interesting to note, though, how, how much our colonist loves this planet, but it's also very similar to Mars at the same time. Both this primordial world and Mars, he is totally alone and he has no one to share his experience with. Of course, the big difference being the primordial world in 50,000 BC is ripe with potential and hope, while, Mars is the end of that journey and it's all desolate and humanity's, ended, basically. So, but yeah, I think it's interesting to kind of draw those parallels between, the world he left and the world he really loves, being somewhat similar, of course, just being at two opposite ends of the spectrum of human history, one at the beginning and one at the end, and how much they're opposite, yet they somehow resemble each other a little bit. And then that takes us to the 11th and final track on this first half of the album, and that is the Dream Sequencer Reprise. And this is just an instrumental track, and I read somewhere one of the theories that someone put out there on the internet was that this track is the colonist waking up in the dream sequencer as it powers down. And I really like that concept, so I'm sticking to it. So that is about all for part 1 of the Universal Migrator. Make sure you hit subscribe if you haven't already to get notified when I put out part 2, Flight of the Migrator. Also, drop down in the comments and let me know what you thought of this explanation theory. If you had alternate ideas or different opinions, I always like to hear about those, so make sure you drop those down in the comments. Also, drop down in the comments if you are a Boston Celtics fan, and we can chat about how excited we are that they're in the finals. I invite you to join my tribe of freaks, join my Metalhead community, and go down to the link in the description and sign up for my email newsletter. From there, you'll get to request videos that you want me to do, and you'll also get access to a private playlist of bonus videos, and you'll also get to be amongst a community of fellow freaks as well. Anyway, thanks for watching.